Thank you. Perfect then. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this event titled Dealing with Post-Assad Syria, Room for Cooperation Between China and the EU. My name is Christy Kozma. I'm the co-head of events at European Guanxi, and I'm delighted to serve as your moderator for this event. Before we start, just a quick introduction of European Guanxi. European Guanxi is a nonprofit organization represented by the dedication to developing a network of young European professionals and EU-China relations, build a network of China-focused young Europeans, and contribute to refining the EU's geopolitical and interplay of interests and strategies in Syria as it transitions into a post-Assad era. With us, we have two distinguished speakers who will share their perspectives on this topic, focusing on the roles and approaches of China, the European Union, and Syria itself in shaping this crucial geopolitical landscape. Okay, so before we jump into their insights, let me briefly outline the structure of today's event. We will begin with introductory remarks and an overview of the situation in Syria. And this will be followed by two expert presentations, each lasting around 10 to 15 minutes, and a discussion round to close where we'll address some guiding questions and invite reflections from our speakers. Okay, so to set the stage, Syria has always been a key geopolitical player in the Middle East, sitting at the crossroads of Asia, Europe, and Africa. Its strategic location has historically made it a battleground for influence among regional and global powers. The European Union and China have both played distinct roles in Syria's history. On one hand, the EU's involvement has often revolved around diplomacy, development, and human rights advocacy. And in the years before the conflict, it worked through initiatives like the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership, aiming to foster closer economic and political ties. And during the civil war, however, the EU focus shifted to humanitarian aid, refugee assistance, and backing political solutions to the conflict. On the other hand, China's engagement with Syria has been more recent, steadily growing. Historically, China was less involved in Syrian affairs. However, as part of its Belt and Road Initiative, Syria's reconstruction and economic potential have become focal points for Beijing. China has prioritized infrastructure development and has also provided diplomatic backing for Syria at the UN, aligning its broader emphasis on sovereignty and non-interference. As you all know, unfortunately, for over a decade, Syria has been through unimaginable turmoil. What started as peaceful protests in 2011 quickly spiraled into a brutal civil war, drawing in regional and global powers. The Assad regime, with backing from Russia and Iran, they held on through years of conflict, while opposition forces, extremist groups, and international players fought for control. And the result of all this was millions of people displaced, cities in ruins, and humanitarian crisis that continues to this day. Today, with the fall of the Assad regime, Syria stands at the crossroads. The country is fractured, with different groups and foreign powers still vying for influence. And as you can imagine, rebuilding won't be that easy. There's a challenge of restoring governance, ensuring security, and addressing the scars of war. As we explore these dynamics today, the central questions are: how will the new Syrian government balance these relationships? Can China and the EU find areas of cooperation in supporting Syria's recovery, or will their approaches diverge? And where does Syria fit within the larger geopolitical shifts involving China, the EU, and other global powers? Okay, so let me now briefly introduce our esteemed speakers. First, we have Dr. Tufik Saryadin. So, Dr. Saryadin was born in Lebanon. He studied at the American University of Beirut and worked at the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees before earning his doctorate from Nagoya University's Graduate School of International Development. His research focuses on the rise of China in the BRI era and its impact on US hegemony vis-a-vis the global south with a focus on the Middle East and Southeast Asia. He currently resides in Nagoya, Japan, where he lectures at the Nagoya University of Foreign Studies and Nagoya City University. He has also written a book on China-Pakistan relations and articles on China-Middle East affairs in the Diplomat and Geopolitical Monitor. And we have Dr. Trombetta. So Dr. Trombetta was born in Rome. He studied at the Sapienza University of Rome, and then University of Rome, Tor Vergata, and he earned his doctorate from Sorbonne University. Lorenzo Trombetta is a Rome-based senior analyst on the Middle East for ANSA, the Italian news agency, and IMES, the Italian Review of Geopolitics. He's an Arabist, historian, and author with 3 monographs focused on the contemporary history of Syria, along with various academic articles and book chapters on the subject. In 2015, he was recognized by the Syrian Studies Association for authoring the best academic article on Syria. And from 1998 to 2022, he lived and worked in the Middle East, specifically in Damascus, Amman, and Beirut. We are thrilled to have them here with us today, and we look forward to an interesting discussion. Now, without further ado, let's begin with the first presentation. Dr. Saryadin, the floor is yours. Thank you. I will stop sharing. You can take over.
Thank you, and good evening from Japan. It's 11 p.m. here. I'm very happy to join you. Thank you for inviting me to speak on this very important topic. So, China's view of post-Assad Syria. As I was introduced, my name is Tufik Saryadin. I work at Nagoya University of Foreign Studies and Nagoya City University, graduated from Nagoya University. Let us begin. So, I'll start with the most critical aspect of this transition, which is emboldened Uyghur militants. As you know, throughout the Syria's civil war, some Uyghurs joined the fight against Assad, and they also fought alongside Ashara. As you know, Uyghurs inhabit the westernmost part of China called Xinjiang, and this area is of strategic importance to China's Greater Belt and Road Initiative project. In fact, it is the launching point for 2 of the project's main road-based limbs, which is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor that stretches from China to Pakistan by way of Kashgar, which is the westernmost city in China, as well as another roadway that stretches into Asia Minor. And so any tumult there from newly emboldened and possibly more experienced Uyghur fighters would be quite perilous for China, which is trying to bolster Xinjiang into becoming more economically prosperous, more socially stable, and a reliable launching pad for the rest of its very important global infrastructure project. Therefore, Ashara's victory here may carry with it some elements of caution for Beijing when it comes to Xinjiang. Beyond this, I don't think it is that significant a development for the following reasons. If we look at a map of the Belt and Road Initiative, this is the most detailed map I could find conducted by Merix, prepared by Merix. We see that Syria, even though it became part of the Belt and Road, or it joined the Belt and Road earlier in this decade, there haven't been any significant projects to date. The Belt and Road main limbs pass through, as I said, Pakistan. They also go through Iran. They pass through Iraq. Then they go to Turkey. There is no need for Syria in this regard to reach Europe via Asia's territorial routes. Therefore, Syria has no great significance to China in terms of the Belt and Road as a state in and of itself. If I compare it, for example, with Pakistan, Pakistan is also a developing country, Muslim majority country. However, Pakistan is the most influenced country by China due to a number of factors, which you can look at in the book that was mentioned. But one of them is foreign direct investment, as well as strong trade relations. China is Pakistan's number one source of foreign direct investment in a context where, due to several um, due to several instances of Pakistan unable to pay back its debts, many governments have opted out of investing into Pakistan further, whereas China has remained Pakistan's main source of FDI. The same cannot be said about Syria. If we look at Chinese investment into Syria prior to 2011, which is prior to the Syrian civil war and prior to the sanctions package, Syria received a modest amount of foreign direct investment from China, $3.76 billion, all going to the energy sector. If, however, we look at post 2011, we find there has been no significant investment. Now, keep in mind, the China investment tracker from which I got this information only tracks investments totaling above $100 million in investment and construction. However, we can see that in the post 2011 period, there has been nothing, at least significant, recorded in this regard, meaning that even though China and Syria, we think of them as being natural allies, Syria is not attractive enough a destination for China, especially a China that has taken risks and spent a lot on infrastructure projects in the past decade as well as this decade. It's spending less on the BRI than it used to, and is becoming more prudent with its taxpayer money from which the BRI funding comes from. And so, seeing that how Syria was not a major destination back when Assad was in power, who was close to Syria, was close to China, I doubt that it will be a major investment destination at this point in time. It may be in the future, but not at this point in time, particularly because of two things. First of all, Israel has as you know, trespassed illegally into Syrian territory. This is not a controversial topic anymore, where we're like looking at two sides of the same of a discussion. We're looking at one state encroaching into the territory of another state under the premise of bolstering its defenses, which is similar to what Russia is doing in Ukraine. So in this situation, it would be most unwise for any country to invest because the dust is still settling. The government is still figuring itself out. It's not a wise thing to be sending investment or financing to a country that is still trying to find its way in this new scenario. Furthermore, Lebanon recently inaugurated also a new government, a new president, as well as a new prime minister, both of which are not of the political, we say, fabric that has shaped politics over the past decades. Therefore, the situation in Lebanon, as well as Israel's actions, both will affect the feasibility of investing into Syria because in these areas where there's lots of porous militant activity, it's never really certain whether or not violence will spill over or will be impacted by goings on in the vicinity. So these further make Syria an unattractive destination for FDI at the present time. Moreover, if we look at the past 2 decades, we find that Sino-Syrian trade, while it was increasing from 2001 to 2011, it wasn't really that significant to China, at least. To Syria, it may be a different scenario. If we look at the trade between China and Syria in 2022, we see the stark asymmetry. Exports from Syria to China comprise mostly vegetable products, agricultural products. Those from China to Syria comprise machines and technology. Now, this would bolster China's influence because it would impair the industries of Syria from trying to create replicas or similar products, which is the case in Pakistan, for example, due to a massively cheap influx of solar and other renewables from China. Local Pakistani industries have been downgraded. They're unable to compete with the imports. So what's happening here may have pulled Syria further into China and made it more complementary to it as a destination for exports and as a source of imports. But as we see, the imports to China are negligible at only $2 million. Keep in mind, Syria does have oil production capacities. It produces roughly 95,000 barrels per day as of last time I checked. However, even that oil production has not made it to Chinese shores in a significant way because it's mostly used domestically for domestic uses as well as select cheap exports elsewhere, maybe to closer destinations. So Syria, in many ways, is not really essential for China in the Middle East at all. Syria signed a strategic partnership with China in 2022 or 2023. However, China has similar agreements with 16 out of the 22 nations of the Arab League. China's main partners, meanwhile, in terms of export and import, at least in the Middle East, include the United Arab Emirates, as well as Saudi Arabia, for the obvious reasons of energy acquisition and energy resources. The United Arab Emirates also has helped China financially by facilitating currency exchange mechanisms, as well as promoting the use of the Chinese yuan. There are branches of Chinese banks in the UAE to facilitate the lives of Chinese expatriates there with the yuan and the renminbi. And there was also talk of a Chinese military base that was going to be constructed in the UAE, but it was arrested by Washington. Washington told the UAE that it is a red line, it should not do that. And so China's most keen partners in the Middle East are not necessarily those who agree with it ideologically the way Syria would have, or at least Assad would have, but it's actually those who have shown the most willingness and the most economic merit, which has been the UAE and Saudi Arabia to a large extent. So in conclusion, since I only have 10 minutes, the main points are that China's neutrality in the region has paid off. It can do business with Al-Sharia. As in contrast to Iran and Russia, who placed all their bets on Assad and supported him very publicly and militarily, and in a way that the new Syrian government will certainly remember and will not appreciate, China's involvement was minimal, and it was also neutral. And when you look at China's involvement in the Middle East as a whole, China has investments in Iran and Saudi Arabia, in Israel and Palestine, in Syria and Lebanon. And so it cannot be seen as a sort of foreign interference scarecrow the way that Syrians may view Iran and Russia currently. And so China's neutrality has borne fruit in this regard. The worst case scenario is minimally damaging. By worst case scenario, I mean if the Syrian population decide never to do business with China ever again. As I showed you trade-wise, it's a very minimal blow to China. It can afford to lose that market. Meanwhile, for the EU, Russia and Iran's loss may mean there's a power vacuum right now, and both sides are waiting for the dust to settle, waiting to see if Syria will start abiding by international law and will become a regular state like the others. Further, I repeat that there will be no foreseeable investment until the dust settles, meaning that until Israel exits. And the most important point, I think, is emboldened Uyghur militants in Xinjiang. So we can expect to see maybe bolstered security in Xinjiang based on what has happened. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sardine, for this analysis of the Chinese perspective on developments in Syria and Syria's importance for China. Next, we have Dr. Lorenzo Trombetta, who will present the Syrian perspective on the cooperation with China or the EU. Dr. Trombetta, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christy Cosma, and thank you, Tawfiq Sareddin, for your first input. My contribution today is focused on depicting a multifaceted Syrian perspective related to current urgent internal and external priorities. This contribution is based on an intense back and forth interaction with Syrian experts, constitutional experts, political scientists, historians, analysts, being in Syria or being back in Syria recently and living abroad in the diaspora. This perspective has been also already shared and will continue to be shared with the European Union circles, political institutions in various European countries and within Middle Eastern countries. Indeed, post-Assad Syria faces several pressing challenges. I believe China and other international regional powers, as well as European Union, indeed, are called today to consider these challenges with an holistic approach aimed at supporting Syrians with all their various political, communal, geographical belongings in finding a common ground for walking into this delicate transformation phase and reach the long-awaited objective of building from within a state where all citizens, beyond their belongings, would be able to achieve their individual and, of course, collective aspirations. Talking about challenges, both external and internal, of course, all of them are tightly interconnected. This new Syria, that is depicted after December 8, doesn't have a state that could reflect a unitarian and sovereignty entity. From an external point of view, as already Taufik showed us, Syria doesn't have clear borders. First of all, because there are three foreign countries who are actually currently militarily occupying Syria. In the north and partially in the northeast, since 2018, Turkey occupy the north part of Syria. And we all follow the current events. There is a sort of back and forth in achieving some military success, imposing new military facts on the ground in the battle along the Tishrin Dam, along the Euphrates River, a very strategic key resource asset. In the same northeastern region, the US military presence started 11 years ago, at the time under the slogan of fighting terrorism during the upheaval, the initial upheaval of the Islamic State organization, recently doubled their military presence in specific US military bases along the eastern side of the Euphrates River, between the Euphrates and the Iraqi border, and namely on the northeastern side of Syria, close to Iraq and Turkish borders. Of course, we know that US tried to fill the vacuum left by the military presence of the Russian state very recently during the military offensive of November 27. Again, Israel is the third foreign military power occupying Syria, as already Taufik showed us. And again, these three main countries, together with the fact that very recently a Russian delegation went to Damascus to renegotiate with the de facto rulers of Syria the eventual military presence along the coastal Mediterranean region. So we have plenty of regional international powers dealing within the same Syrian territory. From an internal perspective, again, the Syrian state cannot exercise today at least the basic of its prerogatives, for instance, imposing the so-called monopoly of violence, of monopoly of force. In fact, even though the regime change in December 8, currently there is a lack of governance consistency among different territories, different geographies of Syria. In particular, there are several governance systems. I just name the macro area divisions, the western central, let's say from Aleppo to Dara, passing through Hama, Homs, and Damascus, the capital, including the coastal region with two governorates, Latakia and Tartus, are shaping a sort of the same former governmental Syria, different from, for instance, the north and northeastern part of Syria under the authority of the Kurdish forces, supported at least tactically by the US military presence. Far north, again, the Turkish presence is imposing since 2018 and especially after 2019 offensive, again, a different way of governing the territory and managing the resources and the population. But back in southwest, not only close to the area occupied recently by Israel, Daraa and Sueda region, close to the border with Jordan, are expressing since many years and perhaps it's many decades, but let's stick to the recent developments, a sort of semi-autonomous way of managing again their territory. So this division of governance system is still in place. And we should also emphasize the fact that within those areas, within each of those areas, especially in the areas under the Damascus-controlled government, there are de facto a wide array of nuances concerning how political and military local forces manage power. So we cannot say that in Latakia countryside there is the same outset of the relationship between center and periphery, of the same level of imposing violence between citizen population and the new branded armed and security forces. There are, of course, beyond, let's say, the very superficial excursus on the political and military challenges, there are other main internal pressing challenges. For instance, a legal one related to what will be the constitutional process in the near and the midterm future. We've heard from the Damascus ruler a few announcements on this aspect, but it is very there is clear lack of clarity. Even though yesterday Ahmad Sharia released a statement announcing many key developments on this subject, but again, there is no yet a constitutional announcement, and that is very urgent to be made in order to give Syrians and other stakeholders a sort of perspective of what could be the next steps in this aspect. The second pressing challenge is the addressing gradually, of course, the economic and financial challenges as the country suffers, as you know, a protracted and unprecedented crisis due not only due to the long-term Western sanctions, but also the effects of the protracted armed violence in the country. The third, very briefly, mention the third challenge is related to the first one and to the second one, again, a sort of institutional challenge. Since many years, and perhaps even before 2011, when the first violence erupted in the country, the Syrian state suffered from widespread corruption, lack of good governance, and many other protracted issues at this level. But during the war years, and especially under the pressure of these governance deeply differences among different geographies, the state is in many aspects collapsed. And so the institution should be revitalized as soon as possible in an organized and coherent manner. The fourth and the last challenge I intend to emphasize today is the transitional justice related one, namely focused on trying to healing social and communal fractures that have been deepened during this era of violence, and even after December 8 have not been addressed. On the contrary, in some key regions like Homs, Tartus, Latakia, we have witnessed relatively low but significant in a way bloody episodes of vendettas, killings against the backdrop of communal, political, ideological, and perhaps also financial issues among, let's say, a very schematic divide between Sunni Alawi with all uh, the attention that we should put along these definitions, and again, Arab Kurds, especially in negotiating nowadays under external pressure, what could be the new Syrian identity between communities that for decades have been um, uh, put one against the other. So, in conclusion, I think that China and the other countries involved directly and indirectly in the Syrian issue should really rethink their approach in supporting the withdrawal of all external forces and supporting a truly genuine from within internal dialogue process that could include as much as possible all Syrians around the same table, including Kurds, including people who are considered, let's say, too close to the former regime under a transitional justice ad hoc tailored on the Syrian context process that could really help Syrians in facing this transitional period and overcome any possible risk of return and escalation of violence and again spillover of political violence, namely terrorism and increasing migrations flows along the Mediterranean. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Trombetta, for your very interesting insights on Syria. I'd like to thank again both our speakers for their excellent presentations. We'll now enter our discussion round, during which I will pose a few guiding questions to delve deeper into the topic. I'll just share my screen. So maybe we can start with the first question. In which ways do China and the EU share similar approaches to the post-Assad Syria? I don't know which one of you would like to take this question first. Maybe you're free to choose.
Go ahead, Lorenzo, if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. I think that first of all, EU and China has different approach due to their different geographic position vis-à-vis Syria. Even though China, as Taufik already shown us, is approaching geographically through its ambitious infrastructural projects, it is clear that for European countries and the EU as a unique institution, there is a clear direct national interest to, first of all, consider Syria as sort of a laboratory, a positive laboratory for starting a new sequence of virtuous governance in the eastern side of the Mediterranean. I already just mentioned two main issues that from a European perspective are very pressing, the migration influx of people coming from not only the central Mediterranean, but also from the eastern side of the sea, as it happened back in 2015, 2016 with the migrant crisis, but again, also political violence coming from or receiving inputs from a sort of lack of political representatives in Syria and in the region. So from the European point of view, it's a very top priority addressing Syria nowadays. That's why we also seen European countries and European representatives rushing in rethinking their sanction system in order to support the new political transformation in Syria. It's still ongoing, so we should be very cautious in giving clear indications on that. But I think that China has in a way the luxury to wait and see, at least for this pressing challenge, and see under the water how the closest and the most involved regional international powers, Russia and the US, would behave in order to shape the governance environment in Syria. I think this would be consistent with China approach, not only in the Middle East, but in other geographically far scenarios from China, where its soft power is having a much more strong impact in comparing to a direct and perhaps hard power exercise vis-a-vis current crisis.
If I may. So I agree very much with what Dr. Trombetta said. I'd like to also add that both, I think, would want stability in Syria. They'd want the dust to settle, as I said, before they. Well, the EU is thinking about lifting sanctions. They put a roadmap for it, and China would like to see those sanctions lifted before it even thinks about investing. But the prerequisite for that would be stability of some sort, at least at the government level. They have to decide what the government is going to look like, what the structure will be, who will be voting for whom. Will it be a system like Lebanon where you have each area voting for a person and it's based on religion, a sectarian scenario, or would it be more in the European style where religion doesn't really matter, you just vote and someone gets elected into parliament and then in the presidency. So I do think that they both care about stability, and they both, I think, would be eager to look at what the new Syrian market would look like post-liberalization. We know that Syria's market has now become liberalized. Things have become a bit cheaper for people there. Last time I checked, and this might mean an easier way for importers to bring in Chinese or European goods. Of course, each country, the EU and China, are both trying to become major exporters of advanced technology. We saw China come up with DeepSeek a few days ago, showing that it can really compete with Europe and with the West on high end technologies. And so the question is, which source for Syria will be that for those high-end technologies. So I think that's what they're both looking at.
Thank you. Very interesting. Maybe we can move to the second question. How do the Chinese and European approaches to the post-Assad Syria differ? Maybe we can follow the same line. Maybe Dr. Trombetta, or if you'd like, Dr. Saradin.
Yeah, thank you. I would like just to comment on one aspect that Taufik Sareddin just mentioned related to the sort of initial steps to liberalize the Syrian economy. Many economists and experts in Syria are expressing fears or doubts that this liberalization path could lead to an increase or a deepening of inequalities among an already vulnerable, highly vulnerable segments of population. Without a strong institutional reshape based on equalitarianism and also a counterbalance among powers, and the restructure of the economy and financial situation based on transparency and accountability, any liberalization efforts could benefit many regional international actors and also many Syrian already powerful actors within and outside the country, but it would perhaps increase the suffering of many Syrians, and this eventual liberalization process, as we have seen in many other regional countries, may pose a new trigger for marginalization. And so fleeing from, for instance, rural regions and having an impact in creating new peripheries along major urban hubs such as Aleppo and Damascus, as it happened in the 80s and back in the early 2000s. And again, this rural-urban divide could pose another period of conflict and armed violence in the next year. So I think we should look at this liberalization process within a wider, as I mentioned before, holistic approach in order to save Syrians towards unprotected, let's say, transformation path. Talking about the second question, already we tackled in our presentations and answering the first question, but I think first we should specify something that perhaps is not necessarily clear to all the interlocutors, that European approaches are not one European, do not represent one approach. We have many European approaches. For instance, France, as a very close ally, at least under the Macron presidency, to Israel and the United States, is expressing a sort of more robust interest in following the path of the United States and to have, together with Germany, a stronger weight on how to exert pressure on the new Syrian authorities, and of course, in close by Lebanon. While, for instance, Italy is playing the card of playing soft power with cultural and other considered soft, not direct political intervention. So we should nuance a little bit the European approaches as they are not only one. While on the other side, China, and perhaps Sareddin is more aware than me of the China attitude vis-a-vis Syria. I think that, again, China could compete in a very long term without exposing itself to direct repercussions of instability developments in Syria.
Yes, well, I certainly agree with Lorenzo in the case of liberalization deepening divisions. What the other thing that could deepen divisions is the China and European, well, in general, European approaches to development. Development assistance by China and by Western countries in general of the OECD are markedly different in that China does not really care and does not attach any human rights related conditions to the aid and to the assistance that it gives other countries. Whereas in the EU, we sometimes aid contracts are tied to things like women's rights or democratization or things like that. And so China's loans and aid have been a lot more welcome in those countries which do not want any political interference in the way or suggestions or even commands to change certain aspects about the government. For China, it's very much, okay, whatever you need to do to pay this back with interest, we are interested. And that's all it takes. So in the case of post-Assad Syria, if China does apply this this purely economic mode of assistance, it could deepen existing divisions because it might not be tackling the root cause of conflict, which may be the inequalities that Lorenzo spoke about. China's formula for development is quite different from the OECD. China emphasizes economic stability. It says that social harmony starts with economic stability, whereas OECD has an opposite view, which states that, okay, to get economic prosperity, first we have to solve the social inequalities. Both have their pros and cons, and that's just one difference that's worth pointing out. The second thing is that in terms of development assistance, which now Syria needs more than ever, Chinese loans are a lot more strict in terms of the grace period by which they are to be returned. Now, I don't think China will invest per se. I think it will finance certain projects, but will not invest. So it will lend to be repaid with interest. A study was done by the College of William and Mary, and it showed that Chinese Belt Road Initiative financing and investment is different from the OECD in that it has a shorter grace period to be paid back, as well as a higher interest rate. And so this gives the Sharia government a lot of options. And from these options, it can learn from Turkey and from other countries that have successfully hedged to get the best possible deals in the best possible sectors. The second area, which I think the two powers differ on, is Russia's presence in the country. We've seen press conferences where EU representatives have called for the path for Syria out of sanctions to involve Russia leaving the country. China, I'm sure, would be most comfortable with Russia staying in the country. It would certainly be a counterweight to American presence. Usually China's fine with the American presence. Indeed, the American security umbrella has rendered stability, and China has capitalized on this stability where it has been able to, especially when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. But China and Russia, of course, are close to good partners right now, and so it would not have a problem with Russia's presence in Latakia and Tartus. On the contrary, if China were to be involved in Syria's reconstruction right now, those reconstruction materials will be passing through Latakia and Tartus, which have a Russian military base, as Lorenzo pointed out. And so I think China would be a lot more comfortable with its investments passing through a Russia-controlled port than a United States-controlled port, especially in the era of Trump 2.0, who has put a big bullseye on China, on BRICS, on the BRI. So I think that's a second point that they differ on.
Thank you very much, both of you, for your insights. I think we can jump to the third question. How might Syria position itself within the geopolitical power dynamics of the China, US, EU triangle? I don't know if Dr. Tombetta would like to go first.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I would like to stress the fact that when we talk about European Union, we need to distinguish between single countries, especially when we are talking about geopolitical power. But indeed, in this sort of triangulation between China, US, and maybe France and Germany, talking about single European countries, we see Syria as sort of a land of exploitation of external powers, more than an active actor that could have an impact, a crucial impact on how external powers are operating in this region. I don't want to say that local actors do not have an agency. On the other hand, we also need to acknowledge the continuous interactions, negotiations among local, national, and local level and external powers. We all seen Eastern, for instance, the 27 military offensive, even though it was heavily funded and supported by Turkey, but later on, this new de facto government in Damascus tried to open bridges and contacts with other regional powers, and is trying to shape his own agenda from an internal Syrian point of view. So internal and external players are continuously negotiating a sort of position. But it is, for all the things that we already mentioned, not forgetting that the military occupation of portions of the Syrian land, US is very well positioned in order to have a direct impact on some key negotiations. For instance, we mentioned the Arab-Kurd divide, We all know that NATO members, NATO member Turkey and the US are negotiating on behalf, perhaps of both sides, but all these Syrian sides are also negotiating on their own, let's say, underneath track. But again, who will be able to impose a sort of eventual agreement along the Euphrates River between these two Syrian sides? It is much more possible that the US will have a say more than China on this. I agree with Taufik, the fact that the new Trump administration could give the observers could give us many could show us many unexpected developments on Syria. Also, we all know that the US are strategically aiming at a sort of military disengagement from the Middle East. That doesn't mean a withdrawal of their military presence, but a disengagement in order to empower local and regional actors, for instance, Saudi Arabia, to play the US role, to play the US game without having the United States dragged into the Middle Eastern quagmire. Okay, this is a strategic but objective. We don't know if could be achieved under this administration. We don't know if it would be reverted due to unforeseen events and calculations. But I think that China, as already Sareddin expressed, is playing a very long-term match beyond who will be directly in power in Syria. China has also showed us for the last 3-4 decades that no matter who is in power in the Middle East, China is able to negotiate with all the political actors who have emerged as powerful in that country or in another country. That is a very strategical vantage point for China. And I think that geography, the fact that geographically China is far from the Middle East relatively to other countries, gives a sort of luxury to behave with a very long-term strategy without being involved directly in these ups and downs and regime change here and there.
Yes, I agree very much on the importance of geography. I mentioned previously in my presentation the case of Pakistan. I'd also like to draw attention to the case of Cambodia. Cambodia, as you know, is being run by a similar family dynastic government, the Hun Sen regime, and now his son, Hun Manet, is in power as prime minister, and they've been in power for decades. What's interesting to note is that even though Cambodia is very close to China, it was trying to play both sides, and it played both sides very well. It was able to conduct joint military trainings with Washington, as well as maintain the US as the highest export destination by far, while benefiting from investment by China through the Belt and Road. If we look at the past investments into Cambodia, the majority has been from China. Over 70% of new roads and bridges in Cambodia are Chinese built. However, because due to human rights violations as well as growing proximity between China and Cambodia, the US kind of imposed an arms embargo on Cambodia and imposed also restrictions on trade. And who does Cambodia turn to? China. Now they're doing more military operations, they're doing more military exchanges, arms imports skyrocketed from China. However, Cambodia is able to shrewdly play both sides, so it's not really engulfed by one side or the other. In the case of Syria, I think it can learn from Turkey. Turkey is arguably the country with the most influence on Syria right now. It put, I think, al-Shara into power. It was really the kingmaker in this scenario. So Syria, I foresee a situation where, for example, in return for not helping Iran extend its influence into Lebanon via the previous Shiite crescent formation, it could get military aid assistance from the US, just like Jordan does, just like Egypt does. Furthermore, However, furthermore, I think the U.S. knows very well that it would be a big ask for any public cooperation between the U.S. and Syria when we just got a ceasefire from a genocide that lasted over a year, right there in Palestine, neighboring it. And in a country that's trying to position itself and project itself as a democracy now after all these years, public opinion, otherwise hostile to Israel and therefore hostile to the US, would make it difficult for the US to publicly display any cooperation achievements with Syria, or for Assad government to publicly brag about cooperation with the US. The EU is a bit different in this regard. Its support for Israel, as Lorenzo said, has been very simply because various countries have given different positions. In the EU, Ireland and Spain have been pro-Palestine, whereas, of course, Germany and France have been more in the Israel camp. So I think Syria, if it's able to properly make the most of what each side wants from it, it can stand to benefit immensely. I see a scenario, for example, where the EU sends grants to the Syrian government in order to rehabilitate homes such that refugees can go back and live there. Meanwhile, while this influx of money is happening, China is also China seeing that, okay, things are becoming a bit more stable. Maybe I can start investing in maybe power plants or like setting up, very small investments just to see what happens, because China can produce power plants very efficiently. And even though it's far geographically, China is able to export all over the world with improved infrastructure, especially things like road material. So in terms of infrastructure and hard infrastructure, and whereas in the past, the West had the upper hand, these days, it's China that has the upper hand. The Belt and Road is just a consequence of its overcapacity and the hard infrastructure resources of steel, as well as coal and iron, of course. And so if Syria plays its cards right and learns from Turkey, it could see itself developing quite quickly, and while still, keeping as many people as possible satisfied, not joyful, but satisfied.
Thank you. Thank you very much to both our speakers for your insights. I think this has been a very engaging discussion, and I believe it has shed some light on some very important aspects of the geopolitical challenges and opportunities surrounding post-Assad Syria. At this point, I'd like to open the floor to questions from our audience. If you have a question, please feel free to use the chat feature or just raise your hand and I'll call on you. And please remember to keep your questions concise. Thank you. You can also write your questions in the chat, and we'll make sure to read them. Yes, Xavier Hack. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. The floor is yours.
Yeah, that's fine. I have a question about the Turkestan Islamic Party, so the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. So I was wondering, to what extent is China exerting pressure on Tahrir al-Sham, the new Syrian government, to clamp down on this organization? I've read on Wikipedia that their numbers are like 4,000, which is quite significant, I think. I think their main branch used to be or is still, I guess, in Pakistan, Afghanistan. But so it's been rumored that China somewhat struck a deal with the Taliban, that they're clamping down more harshly on this organization. And of course, this can't be very comfortable for China if they have this rather massive. I mean, 4,000 is rather small compared to the Free Syrian Army and HTS, but still quite massive organization that that aims to, you know, establish a Islamic State in Xinjiang, or well, at least is very anti-China. So how is China reacting to this? Is China putting any, well, if maybe you don't notice, but do you think that China is putting pressure on the new government behind the scenes, so to say? And then also from the Syrian perspective, to what extent can Jolani and the HTS, to what extent can they clamp down on this Uyghur organization inside their ranks? How important is it for them, or do they have to fear that it will create fragmentation? And so I guess what they're avoiding is too much dissent and maybe the chances of civil war. So they're trying to unite all their forces. And then also I think there was the idea of giving Syrian nationality to the foreign forces, to the foreign fighters in Syria. So how are they handling this? If you can get some more information on this.
Should we start in order of questions asked? All right. So, to my knowledge, there has been no message from China to the new Syrian leadership about this issue. It would be quite strange for China to be like, okay, the first thing I want you to do is to clamp down on these Uyghurs, you know, because remember the Uyghurs were their allies, you know, just a few months ago. So I don't think China is feeble enough to have that be the first message it says. It would probably use it as a bargain, as in like, okay, if the EU gives you a hard time, we will recognize you and make business with you and improve your country on the condition that you clamp down on the Turkestan Islamic Party, as you mentioned. This is the deal they have with the Taliban. The Taliban does not have any international recognition, you know, to speak of, at least on the Western side. And so China is the biggest economic superpower that they can deal with, or that they can hope to deal with. And China's conditions are quite simple: be as Islamic as you want within your borders, but do not export that or facilitate that happening in Xinjiang. And even though, as you said, 4,000 is not a big number, they could cause problems for China's brand. So if some of those members manage to, well, God forbid, if they manage to sabotage some railway system in Xinjiang, which is a Belt and Road railway system, it could delay delivery of supplies. It could make China less reliable as an import source, so on and so forth. But I don't think, for the record, that they can ever achieve their goals that easily, because Bashar al-Assad was ousted because of many things. One of them is low army morale and a state that was mismanaging its finances and didn't have really the money to bolster their capacities that much. China is the second biggest economy in the world. I think it would be very easy for China to like militarily conquer Xinjiang and have it be run militarily if need be. So they would need a lot of help from Syria if they're going to enact any such change of consequence. But yeah, there's been no messaging, as far as I know, towards that effect yet. It may come if, you know, if China has some leverage. As I showed you in the trade relations, China doesn't really need Syria that much. And if more markets open to Syria, it may not need Chinese goods that much. So it has to really play its cards right if it's going to have the leverage needed to make that request of Syria. It has the leverage in Pakistan. It has the leverage in Afghanistan. It does not have that leverage in Syria.
Thank you. I may add, from the Syrian perspective, me too, I do not have a direct and an accurate knowledge of how many fighters of Uyghur or Turkestan Islamic Party are currently in northwestern Syria, even though I believe that 4,000 perhaps is a little bit too much. Also, according to anecdotes and observations of direct witnesses on the Idlib and Latakia mountainous areas. Anyway, looking at the professional journey of Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, Ahmad al-Shara, in the last, let's say, 12, 13 years, when he started coming from neighboring Iraq as an Al-Qaeda representative into Syria, and then analyzing its various transformation, its various political transformation from that initial phase in eastern Syria and then in Idlib, how he gradually changed and abandoned step by step some more radical groups that initially supported him and contributed to its political empower. We can predict, but of course, all predictions can be wrong, but we can predict a continuity path from a Jolani point of view in order to acquire power, abandon some fringes of more radical groups that could pose a sort of challenge to his aspiration to be credible and a legitimate internationally leader. So we can only assume that in case there would be a sort of external pressure, even from the Western side, in order to distance himself and his authority from these so-called radical extremist foreign fighters, Turkestan Islamic parties and other groups, I think he may choose the path of accreditation and finding legitimacy vis-a-vis foreign Gulf investors, Western countries, and so on. And he will be able, as he was already able in the past, to abandon more Qaedist, more jihadist, and other radical groups in order to be promoted politically and socially. At least in the last Idlib Salvation Government phase, that was a very interesting dynamic. So I don't have a clear answer for the future, but I can use the past in order to forecast a sort of continuity pattern for the short-term future.
I see Alessandro's hand raised. Alessandro, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I wanted to ask a question regarding military military sales. We've seen in the Sahel now with the various coups and the decline of influence of France, but the West in general. While Russia's been busy with its own war and not able to provide those military sales, China has stepped in, and also Turkey has joined the fight. So I was wondering, how much, in your opinion, is there a chance of China getting majorly involved in the sales of weapons to Syria, or if Turkey is gonna take almost the majority stake in trying to provide security? As I can imagine, it's gonna be difficult, at least politically, for the new Syrian government to justify acquirements of weapons from the US and France, which have been selling those weapons to Israel to continue its war crimes in Palestine. Thank you.
I guess that's the question to me. Thank you for the question. Syria decides who it buys arms from. There's no imposition from I think outside countries as to what it should buy. I do think though that Turkey would be the primary market, but Turkey is not able to manufacture everything China can, and China is willing to sell arms no matter to who. It doesn't really have any restrictions. Whereas we see some members of the EU trying to impose an arms embargo on Israel and things like that. China is a very opportunistic businessman. If it sees a market, it's going to sell. We see that China has become more sophisticated in the production of drones. So let me give you an example to showcase what could happen. So in studies of hegemony, one of the leading theories that I like to use is called world systems analysis. And one of the theories about hegemony is called bifurcation, which was pioneered by Antonio Arrighi, who was an Italian world systems scholar. He said that hegemony is going to unravel and it's going to split into two halves, the economic half of hegemony and the military half of hegemony. So a Chinese hegemonic order, it's difficult to completely enter into, unlike previous episodes of hegemony where you have, you know, Netherlands, then the UK, then the US after wars. The current transition to a possible Chinese hegemony would be very difficult to do. So what's happening now, according to them, is military and economic hegemony are splitting apart. Of course, we have soft power, that's very important, but for the bifurcationists, it's those two parts. Now, they foresee that the US retains military dominance, so its military remains the most dominant, which means that its technology, military technology, remains the most desired worldwide and the standard and the best possible that you can acquire. Its training as well, the most sought after. Whereas China becomes the economic center of gravity of the world and the number one economy, so on and so forth. In Pakistan, what my research has found is that the Pakistan military, through partnerships with China, has been able to dispose of a lot of key American technologies. For example, Pakistan does not use the GPS system. The GPS system was designed by America's military. It currently uses the Chinese Beidou navigation system. It also has many joint military exercises with China, mostly to give India a message of like mutual partnership and mutual strength. Pakistan's military is also being trained by China. This is the first generation that is trained completely by Chinese military personnel. The Chinese Navy has a presence around Pakistan to protect investments there. Imports to Pakistan of Chinese military equipment have also skyrocketed. China used to be an importer of drones. Now it's an exporter of drones. It's exported them to Thailand, Nigeria, Pakistan, to name a few. And so China is really stepping in as a security and military provider to Pakistan. Going back to Lorenzo, this is because China has a huge geographic advantage in Pakistan. They're neighboring states. So the US presence there was always a bit difficult. Also, Pakistan refused a request by the US to set up a base near Afghanistan to monitor the evacuation of American personnel from Afghanistan, which showed that at the government level, Pakistan refused US military cooperation and is embracing Chinese military cooperation. The caveat, though, is that American military technology is still superior and the most sought after. And so Pakistan found itself having to import the latest American technologies because that's what India was getting. And it had to be on the same level as India because they're both hostile towards each other. In the case of Syria, I don't think the US is going to supply Syria with any weapons because then it would be on the same level as Israel. And even though Israel is in the wrong here, as it almost always is, the US will side with Israel, eventually or inevitably. And so, the most let's say China-friendly scenario is this cooperation I'm talking about, but it has to contend with kicking Russia out because Russia has no economic clout to speak of. Russia's clout is military, primarily military, and so I don't think China would, unless the market dictates that it is more efficient for Syria to go along with China, then I don't think China will just kick Russia out. In other words, if arms from Russia are more expensive than arms from China and they're the same kind, Syria will pick the arms from China. And Russia will not find this offensive because it will say the market has dictated this, no hard feelings, it's okay. Turkey is also in the conversation, but I don't think that the sales will happen immediately. We have to see like the dust settling and what the conditions of the EU are for the lifting of sanctions, because that's everybody's goal right now, it seems.
Thank you, Taufik, and thank you, Alessandro, for the question. Building upon what already Taufik said, I want just to emphasize a very key aspect of this short, mid-term issue. As in Lebanon, the new pro-Western Syria, as it is about to emerge, after Iran has lost, or at least was marginalized in terms of influence in this key region, and Russia is renegotiating, losing, of course, its key position, its key for decades position in Syria. Nowadays, I don't think that the Western and the Gulf powers have the objective of empowering the military in Syria. Right after the December 8 developments, we have seen huge, widespread Israeli aerial attacks on almost all the former military infrastructures and weapons, ammunition, equipments along the western coastal side of Syria, and also in the central part, namely in Hama. Homes are surrounding Damascus and Damascus city. So the main objective of Israel, and we all know that US, France, and the main other European countries are now supporting this strategy, is to keep the neighboring countries, the Arab countries neighboring Israel, or in complete normalization environment with Israel, as it happened with Egypt in 1779, for Jordan 94 with Wadi Arab agreements, and Lebanon never enjoyed a proper air force, a proper armed maritime task force, and of course Syria being not anymore under the Iranian and Russian umbrella, in terms of, from a Western perspective, that should not pose any military threat to Israel. That said, I don't think, and I agree with Taufik, that in the let's say short, mid-term, there won't be any crucial development in selling weapons, not only for clear legal issues related to sanctions and whatnot, but also to a very strategic, let's say, direction imposed by the new, perhaps, supporters of this Ahmad al-Sharia government in Damascus.
Are there any more questions? I can't see any raised hands. Okay.
If possible, I would like to ask a further question, but this is more of a speculation probably than I'm asking you for a speculation. How much do you think this new government will be respecting these principles you've been talking about? So trying to steer away from fundamentalism and trying to create a government that can be perceived by Western states as something akin to their preference. Like there's been a lot of doubts about the declarations that have been made at the beginning, but at the same time, until now, it seems like there have been no repressions, there have been no harsh Islamization, no, not Islamization, that's the wrong word, but radicalization movements inside the country of the government and the political situation. And I'm curious how much you think this is a strategy on the short term to try having the sanctions lift, to try get investments back in, and kind of the trust of Western Occidental governments that care and have been, let's say, media worried about it, and how much this might be an actual how things will actually move on. Thank you.
Lorenzo, your mic is off.
Yes. I try to answer, even though it's very hard to make predictions on that. But very quickly, I think that we should wait and see, of course, and we should give plenty of time to this Syrian transition to show us what could be the let's say the main features of this political transformation. But as I mentioned in my 10 minutes presentation, there are some challenges that should be addressed very urgent. And these first 2 weeks, the first 2 months, the first 2 months, almost 7 weeks from December 8th to today, are showing us not necessarily positive indications of where this de facto power is about to go. I stressed again the fact that they announced the holding of a national dialogue conference, but without giving any clear indication of who will be invited and who will decide who will be invited. There is no date for that. Yesterday developments with the dissolvement of the former army, of the parliament, of the Ba'ath Party, and also announcing the fact that the Qaid al-Am, the general commander, Ashara, was transformed de facto into the president. All these signs show us that there is the will from the new leaders of Damascus to impose themselves as de facto rulers and to extend this, let's say, interim government phase, perhaps more than within the first 3 months announced in December, when March should be a period where everything would be put in motion from an institutional point of view. So, as in Arabic we say, "Maktub mbayin min anwano," the first steps of these developments were not necessarily positive. Again, after more than 50 years of authoritarian power, after 14 years of bloody internal and regional international strife on the Syrian land, we should and we could not expect anything different. But we should be very, very cautious in managing our positive expectation, given this set of situation internally and externally.
If I could also add something, this conversation has really stressed the importance of sanctions being lifted by the US and the EU. But I think we neglected the BRICS dimension. If, for example, Syria finds that it's more feasible to become closer to China and perhaps joins the BRICS, and the BRICS come up with their new currency, this currency could circumvent the sanctions. The sanctions are just in place because certain brokers do not want to lose dollars or do not want to be punished by the US in some way through the SWIFT system. But a BRICS currency would help circumvent this. And this goes back to what China has been not trying to do intentionally, but it just has done it, and it serves a purpose, which is creating a kind of parallel financial system. China has something called the Shanghai Gold Exchange, and it's open to everyone to use to deposit gold and get Chinese yuan in return. Many countries particularly in the developed world, which are, let's say, less than democratic, have found in China's financial systems a kind of pocket in which they can escape from otherwise strict or demanding European and American financial institutions. And so if the BRICS becomes bigger and bigger and eventually forms its own currency, sanctions will not really matter that much from the EU and American side. This is why the dollar and its continued use as the world's reserve currency is so important to the United States. Once the dollar becomes not secondary, but not as powerful as it is now, a lot of people can get away with doing a lot of things, for better or for worse. So that's just something to keep in mind as we see these developments proceeding.
Okay, I think I think we don't have any more questions. I think we can conclude the discussion here. I want to extend my sincere gratitude to our speakers, Dr. Tufik Saridin and Dr. Lorenzo Trombetta, for taking the time today to share their expertise and perspectives with us. I would also like to thank all of you for attending and engaging in this conversation. And we hope to see you at our future events. If you'd like to learn more about European Guanchi's events and publications and podcasts, make sure to follow us on our social media platforms. So yeah, thanks again, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.